Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Repo, the Genetic Opera from 2008. And this is the winner of the movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below for the Patreon, become a patron, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. This isn't like a good movie. I was a little worried, but I was also curious because I've known about this film for a while. I'm curious how and why it is a cult film, and maybe I could get into it. I sort of thought that probably wouldn't work out, but I kept an open mind, and it wasn't great. I was a little worried to do a review because clearly this is not a cult thing that I am into, and I understand if certain people love certain things and they don't want people to review it to just shit on it. And I guess the whole thing with this movie is that critics hate it, but the people who love it really love it because the critics don't get it. I guess. I did hear a justification, sort of, for the people who like it from certain reviews, and particularly the Unjustly Maligned podcast, which is a good podcast you should check out. I forget who the guest was, but they kind of said it's a great movie to have on at a goth party. And if this was playing and I was getting drunk at one of those parties, I could see having a good time with this movie. Not necessarily as a great movie. It seems like a lot of the people who like it even acknowledge that it's not good, which I think is interesting. I sort of am like, okay, I get you, fan base. You get that this movie stinks, but you still love it. And I don't think any of the music's very good. I don't think narratively this film works most of the time. And it's sort of like listening to your cousin Steve at Thanksgiving explain the world building for his goth fantasy novel, and you get really bored, and then you're like, Steve, like, what is this thing even about? And you go, I told you the world it exists in. And then you're like, so the job search isn't going well, I guess. It's just overly world building heavy. It has a lot of songs, way too many songs, a few that work. I'm not going to say this movie is all horrible. There is mass organ failure all over the world, or just in America. There's just like a lot of organ failure. And then this company Genco, which is run by Paul Sorvino's character, has come up with a way to replace people's organs, and organ transplants and like body changes out of things, I guess, has become common practice, both because people like sort of need to, because organs are failing all the time, and as like a style fashion thing as well, sort of. And he is getting close to death, and he needs to find a heir to his fortune with his 3 children, 2 sons, one played by Org from Skinny Puppy, and Bill Moseley, who was in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and a bunch of Rob Zombie movies, and then Paris Hilton, fittingly enough. So he's looking for an heir, but at the same time, Anthony Stewart Head plays a repo man, and one of the guys who takes the organs back, but his daughter is really sick and has to stay inside all the time, and they're like connected somehow, and there's like a blind singer person with the replacement eyes, and there's like a whole backstory with the mom thing and the girl who's in the house all the time coming out at night, and that's like the movie, I guess. Yeah, so this film has probably way too many characters. It really has way too many songs, and it doesn't necessarily have all the time the greatest people singing the songs, or people who know how to carry a tune necessarily, but then other people in the cast, they have great people, Broadway kind of caliber kind of people, both, you know, from Sarah Brightman to Anthony Stewart Head, who actually played Frankenfurter, I think on the West End. They played Frankenfurter at some point. Even the guy who wrote the screenplay and wrote the thing that this is based on, which is called The Necrochance Debt, Terrence Zerdick, does a good thing explaining like kind of the drug of this, and all his songs are generally well performed. But then people you have like Paul Sorvino, who's in apparently a lot of these guys' musicals and is super into it, I guess, since he keeps coming back. I do not understand why he was cast in this. He was really horrible. Alexa Vega, I'm like half on because I think she has a good voice, but I feel like they don't really give her a character, so it's like kind of one of those things where you could debate whether she's like a bad actress or whether this script is not written well for her. There's a lot like I could see that could work for it, but there's just so much going on. There's so much world building. It does feel like a fan fiction-y, weird kind of someone with their dumb fantasy novel kind of thing, where they're just so obsessed with it. They're not thinking about the story that will ultimately get you into the world so you can do world building stuff with. It feels so indebted to this stupid world or whatever that it doesn't really want to let you in. But that's also sort of the appeal of it, is that people who aren't into the cult aren't going to get into it. Now, narratively, my biggest issue with it was times when they would just constantly repeat certain plot points over and over again. They even had a point where they would literally have a motion comic kind of sequence, seems to be how most people are calling it, but it's sort of like a comic book sequence where they explain backstory. And I understand this film had various production problems and things like that, so I thought, oh, okay, I guess that's how you decided to do that. It's not the greatest way, but, you know, that's what you had to do. Fine. And then they'd literally have a musical sequence directly after that part, doing almost the exact thing that the comic book part did, which made me go, huh? Like, why would you do that? Like, you have a song that's doing what the comic book did, then why have the comic book? There was a few times where the comic book part made sense and wasn't going to have literally the information you learned from it repeated directly after, but for the most part it was like that kept happening, and that was really annoying as a viewer. It felt like this film had like no faith in me as an audience member. You don't need to remind me of your stupid plot, just like do your stupid plot. I will admit that this is like, you know, a very uniquely made film. It's directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed Saw 2, 3, and 4, and is, you know, involved with Twisted Pictures, who helped make the Saw movies. The director of this wasn't at the time known for doing kind of musicals, so it's an interesting idea to do it like such a weird, odd, kind of strange film, but that ended up kind of biting him in the ass. It seems like his directorial career kind of sort of ends to a certain regard in terms of mainstream releases. After this film, it didn't really get a good release by the studio, but then they did like touring shows and so forth and got more people into it. And I will agree that this film, clearly, like, they didn't have a lot of shoot days, they didn't have a ton of budget, and they tried to make it work. But a lot of it, like, it shot digitally at a time where that doesn't look as good as it certainly would now digitally, and I think cinematography wise, they don't know how to shoot a musical. I mean, they had a lot going against it, but there's a lot of films that have things going against it and they look amazing. I don't think that's necessarily the best excuse, and it felt like a lot of times like they just didn't have enough time, or they just picked like the worst footage to show. That's your best shot of this sequence. Like, it looked like it wanted to be so alternative, it didn't think about what it was being alternative from, and kind of using those musical influences to actually make a really beautiful, awesome movie. In certain ways, like, it doesn't matter what your world is or what kind of story you're telling, you just focus on, you know, making an enjoyable movie, and sometimes that can work out for you, and Repo doesn't really do that. It's so concerned with setting up this plot with this love triangle that happened 30 years ago that adds to this thing and blah blah blah. But it's interesting. I think Repo comes at a time when you had all these studios trying to make cult movies, like intentionally thinking you can make a cult movie, it'll sell tons of DVDs, it'll financially work out for them. And then Repo comes out, and Repo gets maligned and actually becomes like a cult movie, like in actuality, like not the movie they planned. So it's sort of funny that a studio film that was not supported in the time of Snakes on a Plane and all that crap, you get an actual cult movie and they sort of don't actually support it, despite the fact that they paid for it. And I think they probably should have given this film a little more support. I feel like they could have just like pushed it a little bit and it sort of would have worked out. It's not the most expensive musical in the world, and it could have, I think, worked out. It has become kind of a fixture for Hot Topic people and so forth, but I think in that way it's more in like a kind of like, look, this is just goth stuff in a movie. It's like how when I was a kid and I was a comic book fan and I'd just see any comic book movie just because it was a comic book movie. But then, you know, I got good comic book movies and I watch those things now and I'm like, wow, this sucks. And Repo is like that. It's like you're into that subculture, you're into that thing, and you're gonna love it. But it's not a good movie. It's a really bad musical. It has a few memorable songs. It's interesting, like having things like Joan Jett show up and like the 17 song, and it's just very angsty and something, you know, kids would be like, you don't get it, man, this is like so different, you know, you can't handle it. I'm like, well, no, I can handle it, it's just like not a good movie. Like, I can handle blood and gore, but like the gore is really bad in this. It's stuff that I'm like, I mean, sure, you're not really freaking me out, you're just sort of annoying me. I don't really get the appeal of this movie and like why people get so into it and are so in love with it. I get the idea of getting drunk with this movie and sort of having fun with it and with your goth friends and be like, oh man, Repo, you know, and they go, yeah, but let's watch it again next Saturday. And I sort of get that appeal of it, but I think in terms of like taking this film seriously, I just don't think you could. Like, so many of the songs go on way too long. There's singing singing that doesn't work. I did like some of the casting. I thought actually was pretty inspired, particularly Paris Hilton, which, by the way, that's pretty much how I heard about this movie when it came out on like news magazine shows like Access Hollywood and stuff. Would be like, oh, and Paris Hilton has a movie out, and they'd like, this is like the only press they could get for it was Paris Hilton, even though you kind of don't realize she's in it for a little bit. And I was like, oh right, forgot about that. And it is such a weird collection of actors like Anthony Stewart Head, Paul Sorvino, Paris Hilton, Bill Moseley, Alexa Vega, kind of in her first kind of post, like, I'm Grown Up Spy Kids thing, wasn't it? I forget. I think it is. I wouldn't recommend Repo to anyone, but if you love this sort of stuff and you're like super into goth and you're pan pizza or something, I'm sure you'd be really into this movie. But I think even those people would admit it's not a great movie for everyone. It's just very much in that subculture and very much in that kind of goth thing. And if you're into that and into, you know, Nine Inch Nails sort of like goth, I guess, Skinny Puppy, I don't really know their music sort of thing, then yeah, you probably love Repo the Genetic Opera. But this is a cult thing that stays within the cult. It doesn't escape from it. It doesn't get new people into it unless you're like just about to get into that stuff yourself. Repo wants to be the crazy little stinky goth kid in the corner that nobody gets, and is fine with it. It doesn't want to be the popular kid in school or the crossover goth kid who, you know, gets to go out of the parties. Repo's not that. Repo wants to be itself and kind of exist in its own world, and that's why it can have sequels. Apparently there's like, or sort of sequels or other, you know, gothy rock opera musical things that are kind of made later that I didn't even know existed. And that's how media sort of is now. It can exist in that thing and it can hit that niche and appeal to those people and be fine. And for those people, I'm like, more power to you. Have a good time with your little fun little subculture. You should. But Repo the Genetic Opera is like any sort of film I'm going to take seriously, or as a musical or something like that. I don't think this is a very good movie at all. I wouldn't go as far as like the Golden Raspberry and things. I think it has sort of potential, and if you had like a studio that actually believed in this thing or something like that, you could maybe make a really decent film, or a filmmaker who, you know, knew how to shot a musical. But Repo the Genetic Opera should just be able to exist within its little goth world, and for the most part it does. You know, it got reviewed at the time it came out, but I think most people sort of saw it, forgot about it, and it can just kind of exist in its corner and be happy and have a happy little life doing its thing. Because ultimately, I do not think it's very good. I think it knows it's not very good. It had nothing to do with the strike or the production or all the other excuses people have for this dumb thing. It ultimately comes down to, this is not a very good movie. It did not tell its story well, and it was too obsessed with its post-apocalyptic organ transplant world to really do much else beyond that. I sort of get why people like this kind of weird mess of a unique little movie. It's just not something I'm ever going to like, but I think you'll probably agree, if you made it this far in this review, that that's sort of fine, that I don't need to get it, because everyone who likes it is happy and fine with getting it and having this weird alternative thing. So in a way, I guess I'm sort of helping the cult, because you can exist in this film that critics won't get and you get, and it's your own thing, and you can be, as, you know, this opposition to society. And, you know, I guess that's how Repo exists. It exists in its own little world where it can be an alternative thing that most of us won't get, but in actuality the reason is that we won't get it is because it's honestly not very good. So if you've seen Repo the Genetic Opera and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And if you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below for my Patreon and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.